Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice radio, so I've made a podcast. But we're not listening to the podcast today, although you can check that out on iTunes. We are talking about Trevenant, the deck that just went and won the expanded regional championship in Philadelphia. It is the best deck in the expanded format. Now, this deck has a lot of advantages. First of all, being that although you're playing with the Stage 1 Trevenant, the basic Phantump is unbelievably good. The Phantump we're playing with here is the Phantump from Breakthrough, which has Ascension. For a single colourless energy, you just get to evolve into Trevenant, which means if you go second, as long as you can get Phantump into the active and attach an energy, you are guaranteed to have a Trevenant at the end of your first turn. This is wonderful, but wait, there's more, because really here, we are talking Trevenant. Trevenant is the X and Y Trevenant, and it's the ability Forest Curse. As long as he's in the active, your opponent cannot play any item cards from his or her hand. That is phenomenal. We rely on item cards, ladies and gentlemen. Most decks play 15 to 20 of these at least, and if you can't play them, you are going to lose the game. Things like Versus Seeker, Ultra Ball, etc. make decks run. Trainer's Mail, all of these are gone. Now, what you can do is play something like a Lysander to drag a benched Pokemon in the active. Trevenant's no longer active, Trevenant's ability doesn't work, but even then your opponent gets use of their item cards, but they've already used their supporter card for the turn, which means they can't do everything that they want to do. And of course the ideal here is that you set up a couple of Trevenants, and then there is nothing your opponent can do, because all they can Lysander is another Trevenant. And this is what really makes the deck spectacular. Now, I should have mentioned a moment ago the Stadium Dimension Valley. This reduces the attack cost for all psychic Pokemon by 1 colourless energy. So if we take another quick look at Phantump, you don't even need an energy to use Ascension. You can have a Dimension Valley or an energy and you can use Ascension. Tree Slam as an attack is fine. It's not great, it's not amazing, it's fine. 1 Psychic and a double colourless, or 2 energy as long as you've got Dimension Valley in play, 60 damage, 20 to 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon. It's a pretty good attack, it'll spread damage around quite quickly, although with it being damage, it will be turned off by a card like, for instance, Mr. Mime. Alrighty then. And then we get to Trevenant Break. And Trevenant Break puts you up to 160 HP and adds the attack Silent Fear. Psychic and a colourless, and if you've got a Dimension Valley in play, 1 Psychic energy, put 3 damage counters on each of your opponent's Pokemon. Not only are you putting 3 damage counters on each Pokemon, but because it's damage counters and not damage, your opponent can't even play something like a Mr. Mime to get around this. This is utterly ludicrous. Your opponent is sitting there, they are item locked so they cannot play any item cards, and while they cannot play any item cards, you are placing 3 damage counters on each of your opponent's Pokemon, which puts them on a clock of a couple of turns. And a lot of decks, if they cannot get something rolling in a couple of turns, you are just going to run through their entire deck nice and easily. It is quite fun. And if you needed another bonus, you've even got a resistance to fighting. Now, the weakness to dark can be a problem. We'll talk about that in a moment. In terms of being psychic type, it helps against decks like, for instance, Mega Mewtwo. So it's a not insignificant typing. Now, there are other cards we need to play here. Chief among them is Wally. Now, Wally is a supporter card that we've all looked at and thought, that looks really cool. But Trevenant is the one deck that demands you play Wally. Wally is a supporter card that allows you to evolve a Pokemon the turn you put it down, or indeed on turn 1. And this just makes Trevenant ridiculous. Because now, not only do you can go first and you get a turn 2 Trevenant, or you go second and you use Ascension to have a Trevenant in the active at the end of your first turn. Here, you can actually go first, play a Wally, and evolve so your opponent never has item cards for the entirety of the game. And the fact that it's a stage 1, so it takes 1 turn to manually evolve, you've got Phantump's attack that you can use if you go second, and with Dimension Valley you don't even use any energy, and you can go ahead and use Wally here, is just preposterous. And as if that wasn't good enough, remember we're in the expanded format, we're in black and white onwards here, we've got Jirachi EX. Jirachi EX being a EX Pokemon, you bench him, you get to search your deck for a supporter card, which could be a Wally. And of course, you could even, as well as playing Ultra Ball, which of course you'll be playing to search your Trevenant, because Jirachi EX has 90 HP, you can add a couple of Level Ball here. And between Level Ball, Ultra Ball, Jirachi EX, Trainer's Mail, you are going to hit Wally most of the time if you want to. I am not guaranteeing you a turn 1 Wally. I am saying that because of Jirachi EX and Wally, your chances of going first and hitting a turn 1 Trevenant, if you build your deck to do so, are actually pretty gosh darn good. Now you can also of course play the classic Shaman EX just to draw a whole bunch of cards. And you can even do what I might call a speed round deck. Just play a whole bunch of cards like Trainer's Mail and Acro Bike and multiple Ultra and Level Ball here. Now, there are reasons not to do this. I'll talk about them in a moment. But what you could do here is just make a ridiculous speed deck built around getting a turn 1 Trevenant. Ultra Ball, Level Ball, Trainer's Mail, Acro Bike, Jirachi EX, Shaman EX, Wally. Just basically saying, I am going to get a Wally on turn 1. If I go first, you are not having item cards for the entire game. And that's the basic version of this deck. You get Trevenant set up, you item lock your opponent, you break evolve, and as a side note here, if you're playing something like Wally, remember that you can have a Phantump, you can and then on turn 2 you can manually evolve and then play Wally into the break. Or indeed, if you use Ascension, then he is evolved on the first turn, in the beginning of your next turn, I should say. So you will be able to break evolve turn 2 if you Ascension turn 1. So even though the break is essentially a stage 2, we are cheating all over the place to get that bad boy out. You're spreading 30 damage a turn, going through things like Mr. Mime while your opponent can't play items. Now that alone will win you a huge amount of games, but there are other things that you can do, other cards that you can play. First of all, you can play Bursting Balloon. Your opponent attacks Trevenant, they take 6 damage counters. Now remember, if your opponent goes, well, I'm not going to attack and just wait for the Bursting Balloon to go away at the end of your turn, brilliant, you're spreading 30 damage to everything. If they take something off the bench instead, they use a Lysander to KO a Pokemon on the bench, well, brilliant. I've still got my Trevenant break with the requisite energy to use Silent Fear. I am perfectly okay with you taking a weak Pokemon off my bench. Forces them to attack into the Trevenant. And of course then they take the 6 damage counters and you're still using Silent Fear every turn. Now, the thing about Bursting Balloon, and this is what some people use to beat Trevenant, what we call a Shaman loop. I can't beat Trevenant. Trevenant is taking out all of my Pokemon, so I'm going to use a Shaman loop. I'm going to use Sky Return with a Shaman, put a Shaman active, and just do this over and over again. I attack into Bursting Balloon, I take the 6 damage counters, but then I go back to, my hand, so it's fine. And your Silent Fears aren't doing anything. Well, we've got N. So if your opponent tries a Shaman loop, just keep playing N until they run out of Shamans, and then you might be alright. Now, you can play a tech like, for instance, a Jolteon. Jolteon means that your Trevenant will also be electric type, which means that you can use Tree Slam for 60, which is double to 120, which will KO a Shaman. It's a lot of cards. It's a minimum 2 cards in your deck, and that's for a 1-1 line, and your Eevee or Jolteon might be prized or KO'd early, etc. But it is an option to get around the Shaman loop. Honestly, I just play an N and just keep playing N and hope my opponent doesn't draw into them. Now, one card which can be fun in this deck, you're already saying how you can't play item cards, you might as well play a couple of red card in your deck. Now, this was played by the chap who won Philadelphia Regionals, Jonathan Crespo. He actually played a full line of 4 red card. The theory here is, look, you're item locked. So these cards that would usually allow you to draw out of it, Versus Seeker, Trainer's Mail, Ultra Ball for a Shaman, all of them are off the table. So red card just becomes absolutely devastating in a Trevenant deck. To be honest, no matter which version of Trevenant you play, might I suggest red card, and might I suggest please don't play against me in tournaments, it will upset me. Now, if you're not going to play Bursting Balloon, might I suggest playing Hammers? And again, this was the way that Jonathan chose to go in Philadelphia, because in Expanded we've got a lot of options. We've got Crushing Hammer, flip a coin if heads, discard an energy attached to any of your opponent's Pokemon. Enhanced Hammer, discard a special energy attached to any of your opponent's Pokemon. Zorosic, a supporter which allows you to discard a special energy attached to any of your opponent's Pokemon. Or a tool if you're into that. And we've also got Team Flare Grunt, discarding any energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. And this is just brutal. And you can see how we won a regional championship with this. Well, I'm going to red card you down to a hand of 4 while getting rid of all your energy. Oh yeah, and you can't play item cards, and no pressure, mate, but every turn, free damage counters are going on every Pokemon on your side of the field. How do you beat this? And the answer is you've got to set up quick, because if you do not set up quick, you lose. Now, a couple other cards you should consider. Rescue Scarf. You need to be going for your Trevenants. You need to be getting them out. Play a Rescue Scarf. Trevenant gets KO'd. Oh, look, I've got my Trevenant break straight back. I can just break evolve. We are rolling again. You lose all the energy and tools and such, but you keep the Pokemon. That's good enough for me. And because we're in Expanded, you're able to play in A-Spec, those super powerful trainer cards that you can have one of in your deck. Of course, you're playing Computer Search. As I've said, this is a deck that a lot of the time when it sets up, you win. Computer Search helps you set up. Yeah, Dowsing Machine can be fun to try and reuse cards, but you don't want to be going on turn 3 or 4. Trevenant is a turn 1 deck. Oh yeah, did I mention that Trevenant can just allow you to search for Wally? Brilliant. Now you've got one more card that you can grab with a Trainer's Mail, or maybe draw into with a Shaman, that will allow you to get that turn 1 Trevenant. So how does this do matchup-wise? Why did it actually win the Philadelphia Regional Championship? Well, first things first, it beats anything that does not set up as well as it does. You combine red card, Hammers, Item Lock and Silent Fear, and you just beat so many matchups, good or bad. The big deck, or what has been the big deck nowadays, Night March, it's good, but Night March relies on item cards, relies on, rolling and drawing into double colourless, etc. Now, if you're really scared, you can actually play a Karen to force them to put all of their Pokemon back into their deck. But Jonathan's list didn't even play a Karen. You don't really need to, because, as I've said, they have a 4-card hand and no item cards. It's very hard for Night March to set up. And pretty much this goes the same everything. Now, there are 2 matchups which should be quite bad for Trevenant. I don't need to go through all the good matchups because, let me say, for instance, you're drawn against Rayquaza. Red card them to a low hand, get rid of all their energy, spread damage. You're playing against something like a Mewtwo, get rid of all their energy, red card them to a small hand, spread damage. See where I'm going with this? Yeah. But there are 2 matchups which will cause problems. Number 1, we've got Yveltal or Darkrai. There are a whole bunch of really, really good dark Pokemon around at the moment. They hit Trevenant for weakness. They can go ahead and run through them quite quickly. Things like the Darkrai from Breakpoint, or the Yveltal EX, or even the Yveltal from X and Y, which was recently reprinted in Generations, which you can actually use to just chip away while recovering your energy. Sounds pretty good. But as I keep saying, if you've got no hand and no energy, one thing that's very interesting to me, in the top 8 of Philadelphia Regionals, half of the decks were dark. And all of the dark lost in top 8, which means that Jonathan must have beaten a dark deck in his top 8 game. But he's got the tricks to do so. The other deck, and this is much more difficult, is Waterbox playing Rough Seas and Manaphy. Rough Seas heals 30 damage from all of your water Pokemon, and Manaphy heals 30 HP from all of your benched Pokemon, which means it's very, very difficult for Silent Fear to add up to enough damage to really take out all of your Pokemon. You need to get rid of their energy. Now, this is not going to be so easily done, because they can get a Rough Seas in play, And if you can't replace it immediately, you get to just sit there and heal every turn while Trevenant effectively gets nothing. You can buy yourself some time, whereas in dark decks, you need to get all your energy on the field, you need to get rolling very, very quick, you need to start taking prizes. With a water box deck, you can sit behind the rough seas for a few turns, but again, if you never end up attacking with Mana Feast, sooner or later, you will be overwhelmed. I am willing to call Trevenant the best deck in Expanded. That does not mean it's an unbeatable deck. It does not mean it's an unstoppable deck. It does not mean it won't lose to a Night March that sets up really, really fast. It does not mean that it's got a good matchup against Waterbox, and it doesn't mean it's going to beat Dark every time. When I call it the best deck in Expanded, what I mean is, if you want a top cut, your best bet is to play Trevenant. If you want to have the best chance of winning, your best bet is to play Trevenant. It means that there is nothing which is guaranteed to beat it. Oh, I'm playing against a Turbo Dark deck, they're beating me for weakness, red card, crushing hammer, item lock. Not saying it's unstoppable. I am not guaranteeing if you play this, you'll instantly top cut every Expanded tournament you go to. Not even saying I'm going to play it in Expanded tournaments. I'm a Red Rock guy, which ironically basically just cannot beat Trevenant. Hey ho. Now, one last thing. I've done a video recently about a Giratina card, which is coming out as a promo card in December. Now, there's a link in the description where you can look at this card in more detail. What I'm going to tell you is, it turns off abilities of all break Pokemon, including pre-evolutions, and it's a basic. So, it will turn off the item lock unless you don't break evolve, meaning that Trevenant has to choose between the good attack with no item lock or the item lock without the best attack. Because if they don't break evolve, they don't get affected. What you could do here is play Silent Lab. Silent Lab turns off Giratina being a basic, which then turns on the evolved Trevenant. But of course, you can't then play Dimension Valley. It is the best deck in Expanded now, but Giratina's going to hurt it. Now, you know the deal, ladies and gentlemen. There is a like button and a subscribe button. Might I suggest clicking them both? That would be lovely. And of course, there is a comment section. Tell me if you think I'm wrong about Trevenant being the best deck in Expanded. Tell me, you know, another deck which you think is going to beat it. And, of course, follow me on Twitter @TheWassy. Look after yourselves till next time. That is always the most important thing. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.